Johnny strode onto the stage with an ease that seemed almost effortless, his movements unhurried, his posture relaxed but assured. His hands rested casually in the pockets of his tailored blazer, and there was a familiar spark in his eyes, a glint of mischief that audiences had come to recognize from decades of unforgettable performances. The studio lights caught the subtle details of his attire, the layered textures, the understated accessories, the rings that flashed as he gave a small wave. He did not rush to center stage. Instead, he took in the moment, acknowledging the energy. In the room with a gentle nod and a half-smile that felt both grateful and amused. The applause swelled immediately, louder and longer than the producers had anticipated. It rolled across the studio in waves, punctuated by cheers and scattered shouts of admiration. Several audience members rose instinctively to their feet, clapping above their heads. The sound reverberated off the walls, filling every corner of the set. It was the kind of reception reserved for icons, for figures whose presence alone carries cultural weight. Seated at the table, Joy Behar adjusted. Her posture, her lips pressing into a thin line as she waited for the ovation to subside. When it didn't fade as quickly as usual, she leaned slightly toward her microphone and muttered with a trace of impatience, all right, let's save some of that." Her tone was light enough to pass as playful, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. A few in the audience laughed nervously, unsure whether to quiet themselves or continue celebrating. Johnny heard the remark and responded not with irritation but with a gracious smile. He inclined his head toward her, acknowledging her attempt to regain control of the room. There was no defensiveness in his expression, only calm composure. It was the kind of reaction that diffuses tension without directly confronting it. "Johnny Depp, everyone," Joy announced once the applause finally softened to a manageable level. She arranged her features into a tight, television-ready smile. "Thanks for gracing us with your presence." The phrasing lingered in the sea air, technically polite, yet faintly barbed. Johnny stepped closer to the table and extended his hand toward her in a gesture of open courtesy. "The pleasure's all mine," he replied warmly, his voice low and steady. There was sincerity in his tone, a quiet assurance that he meant what he said. Joy accepted the handshake briefly, her grip quick and formal. Almost as soon as their hands touched, she withdrew, her eyes narrowing just slightly as if assessing him, weighing him. It was a fleeting expression, subtle enough that many viewers might have missed it. But in that split second, the atmosphere shifted ever so slightly. Sensing the delicate undercurrent, Sarah Haynes smoothly jumped in, her voice bright and enthusiastic. She steered the conversation toward safer ground with the first official question, about Johnny's role in his upcoming independent film. The mention of the project transformed him instantly. His face lit up with genuine excitement, and he leaned forward in his chair, elbows resting lightly on the table as he began to describe the character he portrayed. He spoke of a man who had lost everything, career, reputation, relationships, and found himself adrift in a world that no longer seemed to recognize him. Yet through unexpected friendships and small acts of kindness, the character slowly rediscovered purpose and identity. Johnny described the role not with flashy theatrics, but with careful reverence. He spoke of the fragility of the human spirit and the resilience that often emerges from profound loss. His hands moved gently as he explained, illustrating emotional beats rather than dramatic gestures. The passion in his voice was contagious. The audience leaned in, their earlier exuberance settling into attentive silence. Even the hosts appeared visibly moved. Sunny Hostin nodded thoughtfully, her expression softening as she listened. Alyssa Farah Griffin tilted her head slightly, as if studying him with new curiosity. The story he told was not merely about a fictional character. It carried an undercurrent of lived experience. When Sunny offered a compliment, praising his vulnerability and honesty on screen, her tone was warm and sincere. She followed it with a question that hovered delicately between professional and personal. "Did the role feel personal to you?" she asked. Johnny paused before answering. It was not the pause of someone searching for a safe response. It was the pause of someone choosing his words carefully. He glanced down for a moment, then back up, meeting the audience's gaze rather than any one host in particular. "I think anyone who's ever been misunderstood," he began softly, his voice lowering in volume but deepening in meaning, "or written off too soon, can relate." The studio grew even quieter. The hum of the lights seemed louder in the stillness. "So yes," he continued, a faint, almost rueful smile touching his lips. "In a way, it's personal." There was no bitterness in his delivery, only reflection. He did not elaborate unnecessarily, nor did he attempt to draw direct parallels to his own life. Yet the implication was clear enough. Over the years, public scrutiny had shaped much of his narrative. Accusations, headlines, speculation. He had lived under a magnifying glass. And here he was, speaking about a character seeking redemption and understanding. The audience responded with gentle applause, softer this time, more respectful than exuberant. It was not applause for celebrity. It was applause for candor. Sonny offered a supportive nod. Sarah murmured an appreciative, "That's beautiful." Even Alyssa seemed momentarily disarmed, her earlier reserve replaced by quiet empathy. Across the table, Joy watched intently. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes were sharp, analytical. She tapped her pen lightly against her cue cards as though preparing for her turn to steer the conversation. The warmth that had briefly settled over the set felt fragile, like a thin layer of ice over deeper waters. Johnny, however, remained relaxed. He leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands loosely, comfortable in the silence that followed his words. There was a steadiness about him, a refusal to rush, to over-explain, or to seek validation. He seemed fully aware that in moments like these, less is often more. When Hollywood's most enigmatic gentleman takes a seat beneath the bright, unforgiving lights of daytime television and finds himself face-to-face with one of the sharpest and most unfiltered tongues in broadcasting, something electric fills the air. The contrast alone is enough to captivate an audience. Grace and quiet magnetism on one side, biting wit and unapologetic candor on the other. It becomes more than an interview. It becomes a spectacle, an unspoken duel of temperament and tone. This is the story of Johnny Depp's much-anticipated appearance on The View, a moment that would later be described by many viewers as a masterclass in restraint, composure, and the subtle power of knowing exactly when to draw a line. It began, like so many other mornings at the studio, routine on the surface yet humming with the special tension that accompanies a major celebrity guest. Producers moved briskly through the corridors, clipboards in hand, murmuring into headsets as they double-checked timings and transitions. Technicians adjusted lights with careful precision, bathing the stage in a soft, flattering glow designed to hide imperfections and highlight presence. Makeup artists performed final touch-ups while interns hurried past carrying bottled water and updated cue cards. The audience, already seated, buzzed with anticipation. They whispered excitedly to one another, clutching phones and program pamphlets, fully aware that they were about to witness something memorable. Outside, along West 66th Street in New York City, a line of eager fans stretched around the block. Some had arrived before sunrise, bundled in coats against the cool morning air, hoping for nothing more than a glimpse of their idol stepping from a black SUV and into the building. There were handmade signs, vintage movie posters carefully preserved, in plastic sleeves, and a palpable sense of devotion that only true stardom can inspire. For them, this was not just another television taping. It was a chance to see a legend in the flesh. True to his reputation for professionalism, Johnny Depp arrived early. He stepped out of his car with the quiet confidence of someone who has spent decades navigating red carpets, press junkets, and film sets across the world. Yet there was nothing hurried or arrogant about his demeanor. A soft, almost mischievous smile played at the corners of his mouth as he paused to greet security staff by name. He wore a crisp black blazer layered over a dark vintage t-shirt, the fabric slightly worn in a way that suggested history rather than neglect. A loosely draped scarf framed his collar, adding a touch of bohemian flair. His signature silver rings glinted under the studio's entrance lights, catching reflections. As he moved his hands while speaking, His long hair, pulled back casually, gave him that familiar roguish charm, half rock star, half poet, that fans had come to adore. Inside the building, even the most seasoned crew members felt the shift in atmosphere as he entered. The hardened stage manager, known for her no-nonsense attitude, allowed herself a rare smile when Depp paused to thank a lighting technician for adjusting the angle of his seat. "You've got me on my good side," he joked gently, earning a ripple of laughter. It wasn't rehearsed charm, it was effortless. He shook hands warmly, offered genuine compliments, on earrings, on polished shoes, on an especially bold tie choice. Each interaction felt personal, unhurried, and sincere. In the green room, the mood was relaxed and almost intimate. Co-hosts Sarah, Sunny, and Alyssa filtered in one by one, greeted by Depp's easy warmth. He shared dry, self-deprecating anecdotes about life on set, stories about his dog's mischievous antics, and playful confessions about the most embarrassing line he had ever flubbed during filming. Laughter came easily. Even Alyssa, often described as guarded and analytical, found herself smiling widely when he noticed her necklace and asked thoughtful questions about her children. It was the kind of rapport that can't be manufactured. It grows organically from attentiveness and mutual respect. But not everyone in the studio seemed carried along by the convivial energy. Joy Behar sat apart on the main set, already in position long before the segment began. She flipped through her notes with brisk determination, scribbling additional remarks in the margins of her cue cards. Her expression was focused, almost severe. Staff members approached cautiously to ask whether she needed anything, water, clarification on a question, an updated fact sheet, but she waved them off with curt assurance. "I know what I'm doing," she replied, her tone firm enough to discourage further interruption. There was a sense that she was preparing for something more than a standard celebrity chat. The show opened as it always did, lively banter about politics, trending headlines, and the latest viral controversy. Yet attentive viewers sensed a subtle tension. Joy's remarks were sharper than usual, her interruptions more frequent. She cut off Sunny mid-thought, dismissed one of Sarah's light-hearted jokes, and steered the conversation back to her own talking points with unmistakable insistence. The audience laughed at appropriate moments, but a few exchanged uncertain glances. The rhythm felt slightly off, like a melody played just a fraction too fast. Then came the introduction everyone had been waiting for. The camera shifted focus. Sarah turned toward it with a radiant, practiced smile that conveyed both professionalism and genuine excitement. "And now," she began, "please welcome one of the greatest actors of our generation, a man who has brought us unforgettable characters and who is here today to talk about his powerful new film. Ladies and gentlemen, Johnny Depp."
"This film also explores themes of redemption," she said gently, her tone steady and sincere. "Was that something you felt was important to bring to audiences right now?" It was the kind of question actors hope for, open-ended, reflective, rooted in craft rather than controversy. Johnny leaned forward slightly, visibly grateful for the shift. His shoulders relaxed a fraction, and the guarded edge that had begun to form in his posture softened. "Absolutely," he replied. Without hesitation, his voice carried warmth again, conviction replacing caution. "We're all capable of rebuilding. That's what makes us human." He spoke the words not as a slogan, but as a belief. His hands moved subtly as he elaborated about resilience, about the universal experience of stumbling and finding one's footing again. He described redemption not as erasure of mistakes, but as growth beyond them. The audience responded with gentle applause, quieter than before, but heartfelt. There was something undeniably relatable in the sentiment. But before the moment could settle, Joy's voice cut through it. "Redemption," she scoffed, leaning back with an exaggerated roll of her eyes. "That word gets thrown around a lot, doesn't it?" She paused just long enough to ensure the cameras captured her expression. "You break things, then claim redemption, then break them again." The impact was immediate. The applause faltered and died mid-clap. A faint rustle swept through the audience as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The temperature In the room seemed to drop several degrees. Johnny froze for the briefest moment, so brief it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not watching closely. His jaw tightened just slightly, a flicker of tension passing across his features before discipline reasserted itself. "I believe," he said carefully, his voice steady and measured, "that falling and rising are part of the same journey." He did not raise his tone. He did not defend himself directly. Instead, he returned to the broader philosophical ground he had chosen earlier. It was a deliberate choice to universalize rather than personalize, to speak about humanity rather than headlines. Joy wasn't satisfied. "Sure," she replied with an exaggerated shrug, her tone dripping with skepticism. "But some people just keep falling, don't they? Some people leave a trail of hurt behind them, no matter how many times they say, 'I'm sorry.'" The implication no longer hovered between the lines. It was pointed, direct. The audience's earlier nervous laughter was gone entirely now. What remained was silence, heavy, expectant. This time, Johnny turned fully toward her. His brown eyes met hers, cool and unreadable. There was no visible anger in them, but neither was there softness. It was the gaze of someone who had decided to engage, not react. "We all leave trails," he said quietly. His tone was almost reflective, as though he were speaking more to the concept than to her personally. "What matters is where they lead." For a moment, it felt like a stalemate. His words were calm, deliberate, even poetic. They offered no confession, no counterattack, only perspective. Joy let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, very poetic," she said, her voice sharp. "Maybe you should try that line on your ex-wives." The collective gasp from the audience was unmistakable. It wasn't subtle this time. It rippled through the studio in a wave of shock. Even Sarah's composure faltered. Her smile froze in place. Sunny's eyes widened, and Alyssa shifted in her chair, clearly unsettled. Johnny's jaw flexed just once. A muscle tightened near his temple. It was the only outward sign that the remark had struck its intended target. But when he spoke, his tone did not waver. "Some things," he said quietly, each word carefully spaced, "are better left off this table." The statement was not defensive. It was boundary-setting. Joy leaned forward, elbows on the desk now, closing the physical distance between them. Her voice dropped, lower and more pointed. "Why?" she pressed. "Because you don't want people to remember the truth. You don't want them to see past the carefully crafted persona." The accusation was blunt. It suggested manipulation, performance not just on screen, but in life. Johnny straightened his jacket slowly, a small, deliberate movement that seemed to buy him a second of composure. When he answered, he did so without raising his voice. "I think people are smart enough to see what they need to see," he said. It was neither agreement nor denial. It was a quiet assertion of faith in the audience's discernment, but Joy pushed again. Unwilling to let the tension dissolve. "People see what you show them, Johnny," she said, her words sharp as glass. "And you've shown them pain, lawsuits, and drama." The room was utterly silent now. No nervous laughter, no shifting, just stillness. "So tell me," she continued, leaning in even further, "why should anyone believe this redemption act of yours?" The phrase hung their redemption act, reducing everything he had said to performance. Johnny did not answer immediately. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The cameras captured the stillness between them, the invisible line drawn across the table. His breathing remained steady. His hands rested calmly on the desk, fingers lightly interlaced. He did not look away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, calm, controlled, but carrying an unmistakable weight. There was no anger in it, no sarcasm, just a quiet firmness that suggested he understood exactly what was happening and had chosen, consciously, how he would respond. The studio seemed to lean in collectively, waiting for his next words, aware that whatever he said would not just answer a question about a film. The question did not merely challenge his sincerity, it questioned his very identity. The word act lingered in the air like an accusation wrapped in theatre. It implied deception, performance, calculation. Johnny studied her for a long, unbroken moment. He did not blink. He did not look down. He did not offer the faint smile he had relied on earlier to soften tension. Instead, he met her gaze with steady composure, his brown eyes calm but impenetrable. The silence stretched between them, thick and deliberate. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, controlled with almost surgical precision. Because it's not an act. There was no flourish in his reply. No attempt at dramatic emphasis. Just a quiet statement of facts, delivered without apology. The simplicity of it seemed to disarm the room more than any elaborate defense could have. The show cut to commercial shortly afterward, but the third segment opened with an energy that felt entirely different from the light-hearted morning program it had been just an hour earlier. The studio buzzed not with excitement, but with tension. Even the audience, usually animated and responsive, sat subdued. The laughter that once punctuated the conversation had vanished. In its place was anticipation edged with discomfort. Johnny sat straighter now. His hands were clasped tightly on the table, fingers interlocked with more force than before. The knuckles had begun to pale under the pressure. It was the smallest sign that Joy's relentless probing had finally begun to chip at the armor of restraint he had worn so carefully. Yet he remained seated. He did not retreat. He did not lash out. There was something resolute in the way he held himself, as though he had silently committed to seeing the conversation through, no matter how sharp it became. Joy flipped through her cue cards with visible impatience. The paper snapped lightly under her fingers. "You know what really bothers me?" she began, her tone shifting from mocking to accusatory. "It's that you expect sympathy when you've hurt people." The words were direct now, no metaphor, no poetic framing, just blunt judgment. Johnny tilted his head slightly, considering the statement. "I've never asked for sympathy," he replied calmly. There was no defensiveness in his voice, only correction. "Oh, please," Joy scoffed. "You show up in scarves and jewelry, like some tragic hero spinning tales of how hard it's been." A few audience members shifted uncomfortably. The remark wasn't about behavior now, it was about image. Persona, presentation. Johnny let out a dry, almost humorless chuckle. "Scarves don't tell stories," he said evenly. "People do." It was a subtle rebuttal, a reminder that appearance does not dictate narrative. But the edge in his tone, barely perceptible, suggested that his patience was thinning. Joy narrowed her eyes. "So tell the real story then," she shot back sharply. "Tell us about the fights, the headlines, the courtrooms." There it was, not a conversation about art or growth or philosophy, but a demand for public confession. Johnny leaned back in his chair. Exhaling slowly, he regarded her with an expression that mixed fatigue and clarity. "I think you've read enough headlines for both of us," he said. A low murmur rippled through the audience. It wasn't applause, it wasn't laughter. It was recognition and acknowledgement of the sharpness in his reply. Joy's patience snapped. She slammed her hand down on the table, the sound cracking through the studio like a gavel. "Don't get cute with me, Johnny." For the first time since he had stepped onto the stage, Johnny's faint smile disappeared entirely. "I'm not getting cute," he replied, his voice dropping lower, losing its earlier warmth. "I'm trying to have a conversation. But all you seem interested in is a spectacle." The word hung heavily between them. Spectacle. Joy let out a short, barking laugh. "Everything about you is a spectacle." It was no longer an interview. It was confrontation. The cameras captured the shift in Johnny's posture before anyone else seemed to fully register it. He placed his hands flat against the table and pushed his chair back. The scrape of metal against the studio floor cut through the silence, louder than it should have been. He rose slowly. There was no dramatic flourish in the movement, no sudden burst of anger. just deliberate action. His jacket fell neatly into place as he straightened to his full height. The audience collectively held its breath. He looked down at Joynop with fury, but with a calm that felt more powerful than any raised voice. Then maybe, he began evenly, and, in that unfinished sentence hovered everything unsaid. The frustration, the dignity, the choice between escalation and restraint. The room seemed suspended in time, waiting to see which path he would take. What had started as a routine promotional appearance had transformed into something far more volatile, a public test of composure, under attack. And now, standing beneath the glare of the studio lights, Johnny faced a crossroads: remain seated in defense, or stand for something larger than the moment.